Hello and welcome to the Bible study. My name is Kent Philpott. This is program number 11 in our series, The Gospel According to Mark. The second gospel, probably the first gospel written, and perhaps as early as 49, 50, AD 49 or 50. It's hard to know, but there has been some indication that it was very early. People are sometimes surprised when they find that that the Gospels were written as early as we've been able to find out. Some of the information that's come back from the Qumran text, we find that in some Cave 7 in the Qumran community that in AD 68, due to an approaching Roman army, the place was covered over and were found fragments, and some of the documents that were found were from Mark chapter 6, 52 and following, the largest of the material from Acts, Romans, 2 Timothy, James, 2 Peter, and so those documents all dated before AD 68. And so we find even a Gospel of Mark, and this from 62, 52 on, and fragments we find. And so scholarship has put a lot of liberal theory, put it away and dealt a pretty strong blow because some of the ideas were that these documents were created until the second, sometimes third century. But we know better now. And even the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Qumran scrolls and so on help us at this point. It's interesting to watch and see how that sort of thing goes on. And so we're in the Gospel of Mark, the earliest written gospel. And we have two stories. In Mark chapter 3 from 1 to 12, we have the story of the man with the withered hand, and the second story called A Great Crowd Followed Jesus. So I hope you got your Bible and able to follow along. And this is a sermon I have yet to preach. Usually I have preached these ahead of time, but because of vacation time, I'm a couple of sermons behind. So I'm going to be working this week and next week with outlines that I have yet to preach. I don't like that, but because the television preaching is far more difficult than the preaching. But we have to do what we've got in front of us. Now, on this story, like all the stories, when I study, I get a gospel parallel, and it'll have the same story that we find it in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, if they all tell the same story, and sometimes in John's Gospel as well. And it's interesting to notice the variation. And you see that the early church made no attempt to make them all line up in harmony. Later they did. And you can see their attempts. People say, well, people changed the Bible. Well, yeah, we know that scribes later on, but that's why we have the new translations. I use the English Standard Version. I like it very much. There's a new International Version, the NIV, very good. American Standard, New American Standard. There's a lot of great translations of the Bible out there, and they are so good because they bring us back to the ancient, far more early manuscripts, and it's really great to look at them. And we see the variations. Then before people started harmonizing centuries later, and the variations indicate that one, they had no idea that what they were writing was going to be inspired, and number two, they weren't copying from each other. They may have used each other's as a format, like we think was used by Mark, but they didn't copy even the same story. They didn't copy word for word because they would say it a little bit different. It's interesting to study Greek And I think one of the most important things that we can do is to make a study of Greek, be able to read a Greek New Testament. Anyway, here we are, Mark chapter 3, beginning at verse 1, a man with a withered hand. Again he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. Now, it's very interesting that here this guy would be. Now, we're going to find out this is on a Sabbath. The last two stories, we have the question about fasting, having to do with fasting there, and then the story just before was the Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath, having to do with the Sabbaths. We get another Sabbath story, but all situations where Jesus' enemies could accuse him for doing what they thought was the wrong thing. Some people have suggested the man with the withered hand was a plant. It's hard to document this, and I had heard it at some point. I was not able to find accompanying or confirming documentation in preparation for the sermon, but it was true that in the temple, people who had physical deformities could not go in. We understand, I think, that is, I would say, pretty accurate. Was the same also true in the synagogues, and I think that you could make a case that one carried over to the other. But here this man with the withered hand. Now, the Greek involved in the withered hand idea, you don't know if he was born without a hand or an accident had occurred, more the idea that an accident had occurred somehow and his hand would not work. So there he is. He's got the withered man with the withered hand. And it says, verse 2, and they watched. They watched. Mark is getting this from Peter. Peter was present. They watched. Remember, this is the Sabbath. They watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath so that they might accuse him. There's something terribly wrong with this. What an enormous disconnect. They knew that he healed people, but in their mind they had been so distorted and so perverted that if he healed somebody, a miraculous healing would take place, but it was on a Sabbath, then the man was obviously bad. Did they think he was doing it in the power of Satan? He was accused of that. That to casting out of demons by the prince of demons, Beelzebul. That was a Canaanite, ancient Canaanite demon or devil or word for devil. And so, is that what they thought? But if they thought that, it's not here. My view is that their views of Jesus and their feelings about Jesus were such that if they figured if he heals the man on the Sabbath, he can't be from God. Figure that out. It's almost just defies logic, doesn't it? So they watched Jesus to see whether he healed him on the Sabbath so they might accuse him. They wanted to accuse him. Now, why would they want to accuse him? Why were they so against Jesus? A couple of obvious things. He was not with any of their religious or political parties. None of them. But there were a number of them. There were the Pharisees. There were the Sadducees. There were the Zealots. One of Jesus' disciples was Simon the Canaanian, otherwise known as the Zealot. But there were the Herodians also. We're going to see the Herodians in this program here. The Herodians. Herodians were a group of people who were allied with the vassal kings who ruled that area under the authority of Rome. Remember Herod the Great, who was the king over Judea when Jesus was born in Bethlehem. And they were still around. Herod had kids, and they were all over that part of the world. And they had their little vassal kingdoms. And they had a rulership. Rome was content to leave that structure, that governmental structure in place. They did it all over the place. Very efficient for the Romans. They just wanted the taxes, and they didn't want a rebellion from these people. wanted to keep them under control. That's all they were interested in. No trouble on their flanks. So we're going to find the Herodians in this story. So verse 3 says, and he said to the man with the withered hand, that is Jesus, he says to the man with the withered hand, come here. Now in the Greek, it doesn't mean come here. In the Greek it means come up, or it literally means rise up and into the midst. The man was apparently sitting down. He wanted him to rise up and come into the middle. So Jesus, they're doing this, and Jesus makes it center stage. Not off to the side, right here. He brings the man up. He says, come here. Then he says, and he said to them, that would be those who wanted to accuse him. Jesus is very bold, isn't he? He doesn't leave. He doesn't try to avoid the confrontation. He's just a young man. He has got 5 or 7 disciples with him at this point. It is thought that maybe Philip and Nathanael are now with him, rounding out the number of disciples to 7. So there he is. But he doesn't slink away. He doesn't try to do anything but directly confront the situation, brings it front and center. Okay. And he said to them, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill? He wants to know, if on the Sabbath, is it okay to do good or do harm? In other words, can you war on the Sabbath? To save life or to kill? Well, why would he give the harm and to kill? Well, this is a time when all kinds of rebellions were going on. Jewish groups were attacking Roman people, and they would do it on all kinds of days. And so there you have the people knew, well, we allow this, the harm and the killing, to go on. Well, how about to do good? If the man is healed of the withered hand, that's to do good. To save life. By the way, that word life is suke, translated so many times as the word soul, but you can see that the word suke means a living being, an actual person, and not some ethereal soul. So which is it? And the answer is obvious. But they were silent, and he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart. Can you picture Jesus doing that? Does that sort of assault your understanding of who Jesus is? And the words are accurate. Angry and grieved at their hardness of heart. Now, hardness of heart is an idiom that just means that they were so perverted inside it in their thinking and their sensibilities that they would say, yeah, you can't do good on the Sabbath. So he sees this. We don't have a record of what they said or what they did. It was probably very obvious to Jesus that this was a setup, that they really didn't care anything about this man with the withered hand. You know, you might think, well, they could bring these people to Jesus. Wouldn't it be wonderful if he healed them? They didn't care about that man. They didn't care if he got healed. They only wanted it, according to their own rules, to attack Jesus so that they could accuse him. They say, you see, he's no good. Come on. And I had somebody say to me the other day about some Baptist preacher like myself who did some kind of scandalous thing. I think it was some doctor back east who was defrauding patients, something like that. I saw it on NBC, so you know it has to be true. And And somebody might say, you see, those Baptist preachers, those Baptists are no good. If they could, maybe, I'm a Baptist, I'm probably no good too, in the eyes of a lot of people, but, if you can pin something on somebody, then you get to wipe them out altogether. They're totally no good. We commonly find this among young athletes. Somebody does some stupid thing, they get branded for life. Anyway, so here we are, and he's angry. He's angry. It's a word in the Greek that means he flashed angry, he was upset, and righteously so. He's the healer, the Savior, the Redeemer. And here's a man that needed to be able to provide for family, maybe be able to get married. He couldn't get it. No woman would have him because he couldn't provide a living. All kinds of bad things happened to this man because he had this withered hand. But if he could be healed, his whole life could be turned around. It might be a fruitful and satisfying life. They didn't care about that. They didn't bring him to Jesus except to have evidence against Jesus, that he heals on the Sabbath. He was grieved. This is the concept of a deep inner grief as he confronted the human dilemma, the human predicament, it's often been called. How could it be in these people whom the Father had created, had this? Where does this come from? Where does it come from? And it comes from more than just us. Yeah, we're wicked enough, but we have a spiritual battle. People do not quite recognize yet in our own era the spiritual battle that we are all facing, that there is a demonic spirit, there is a Satan, there is a devil, there are the demons. Now, a lot of religions understand it. Islam understands it, but doesn't know what to do about it. They have no defense except magical rites and the evil eye. But here is Jesus, and he says, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. Now, you say, well, he stretched it out. That showed he had faith. Now, here's the question. Did this man's faith heal him, or did Jesus heal him? Jesus healed him, but you think, well, he had to have faith first. Jesus cast out demons, healed people. They didn't have any faith at all. They didn't know who he was. I know we like to think, well, if you have faith, God will do it. It's almost like if you have enough faith, God has to. God has to do it. To answer the effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man, God does not have to act at all. God will act according to his will, according to his good pleasure. It is not a magical sort of thing. It took me a few decades as a Christian to figure that out. So it's the power of Jesus, not the man's faith. He did what Jesus said to do. He stretched it out and his hands were restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately, there was no, thank you, Lord. Praise God. There was none of that. What did they do? They immediately held counsel with the Herodians, with the people who had the local political power, against him on how to destroy him. Not to send him to court, not to have him fined, not to have him even thrown in jail, but to have him destroyed. There's another passage here. Let's see if I can find it. I don't think I can. Mark 12:13. Oh, here it is. On paying taxes to Caesar. And they sent to him some of the Pharisees and some of the Herodians to trap him in his talk. They wanted to see if Jesus would pay taxes or not, a political deal. So here you have enemies, the Pharisees and Herodians. They were enemies. They were at each other, but they came together in order to destroy Jesus. Okay, we got to hurry to the next story, and that is a great crowd followed Jesus. A great crowd followed Jesus. And the commentators say there's probably 7 disciples now. We've got Peter and Andrew, James and John, Matthew, Philip, and Nathanael. Verse 7, chapter 3. Jesus withdrew to his disciples to the sea. He got out of there. He's not going to put himself in harm's way unnecessarily. Oh, by the way, in the other story, the anger, it shows the humanness of Jesus. We find in the Old Testament, God has wrath against sin. God has anger against sin. Would we deny him that? We say God can't be angry at sin, of that which destroys us, destroys his creation through and through and all parts of it? Yes, God can. And he is. God angry at sin, and he will judge sin. That's one thing that people do not like. They want a nice, loving, wonderful mama, papa, Uncle Joe, Aunt Ida, whatever. That's what they want. They want this. But God is a God of wrath and anger as well. Anyway, Jesus withdrew with the disciples to sea. A great crowd followed from Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem and Idumea and from beyond the Jordan and from around Tyre and Sidon. Now, almost the whole area of Israel, an area about the size of Northern California, left out one big part. Left out Samaria. I wondered while I was preparing this week, why no mention of Samaria, this large area? Well, the Samaritans had a rival religion that was based on Judaism, but really twisted and different. And the Samaritans weren't necessarily attracted to Jesus because they had their own religion. And they said, well, that's for them. We got our religion. That's always the thing. I was fortunate when I became a Christian, I didn't have my own religion. And I think it is more difficult for people who are brought up in a different religious system. I think especially, you think about Islam right now, I think that's especially true. Yeah, well, we already have what we believe. And there's a lot of people who will think that sort of thing. Well, I grew up this, I grew up that, my parents were this, I was baptized as an infant, I was this, that, and I was a member of this church over here. And consequently, they have no interest in Jesus because they think they've already got it. And so that may be why it is that Samaritans were not attracted to Jesus at this point. When the great crowd heard all that he was doing, they came to him. Now, they heard what he was doing. What was he doing? He was doing two things that they could see. People were healed of real organic diseases. By the way, the withered hand, that was not a psychosomatic situation, was it? I know a little bit about psychosomatic. I used to get into that when I was a teenager. I would have psychosomatic illnesses to get out of stuff, deal with my anxiety. And this was nothing psychosomatic. Disease was organic based. Something happened. And so they saw what he did and cast out demons. You know, it's amazing. Jesus cast out demons a lot. And, you know, I have several books on it and a brand new one called How Jesus Casts Out Demons Today. And sometimes I used to be embarrassed about that. I didn't want people to think I was a complete loon, that I thought there was a demon under every rock and behind every trouble and every illness. Well, I don't believe that. Jesus didn't either. But the fact that there are real demonic spirits to be cast out and are active in our world is beyond question. Absolutely beyond question, let me tell you. And so they came to him, and verse 9 says, and he told his disciples to have a boat ready. In the Greek is little boat. It's just a little boat ready for him because of the crowd, lest they crush him. Lest they crush him. Could Jesus have been hurt? Could Jesus have been killed? How will you answer that question? You might disagree with me, but I would say yes, he could have been hurt. Yes, he could have been killed. You know, in the end of the temptation in Luke's gospel, it says, the devil left him for a more opportune time. So we continually see, here. We continually see the hand of Satan involved here, and this could be one of those times. And it's interesting to understand that because it'll open your eyes to a lot of new things in the gospel where you see, could we be looking at the presence of evil here? Could it have been present at the synagogue with the man with the withered hand? There was potential danger there because it just was. They were looking to accuse him. Again, here we have the situation. There were throngs. You've read about religious gatherings and there's stampedes and people are killed. This stuff happens. This could have happened here. For he had healed many. If there's anything that people will go crazy for, is to be healed. We'll do anything to get healed. We'll fall for every lying, what do you call those guys? Crooks, the quacks. You will fall for them. We'll do the most ridiculous things because of the desire to be healed, particularly when pain is involved. And all who had diseases pressed around him to touch him. They wanted to touch him. Some of them were probably leprous, other diseases. They wanted to touch him. They wanted to grab a hold of him. Verse 11, and whenever the unclean spirit saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." So, not only do you have people who are wanting to be healed are crowding to Jesus, but there are those people who are demon-possessed, who have been invaded by demonic spirits. And what do? They get down, they fell down before him, they fall down on their knees, probably fall down on the prostrate before him, and they call out, "You are the Son of God." Wow! Could it get any better? Really, I should say, could it get any worse? And we find that it says, and he strictly ordered them not to make him known. And by the way, the verb here is kept on. It's an imperfect active indicative. He kept on. He had to say it over and over and over again. He kept on. This was not a simple thing. It was disruptive. And Jesus would not take testimony from demonic spirits. He would not take testimony from those people. You might say, "Oh, well, look, this is really big. Wow, this is going to," the crowds would just expand. I mean, everybody, they're going to go for it now. I mean, even these people that have demons are declaring who he is. They were correct. He is Son of God is code for Messiah. He is Son of Man. He is Son of God. He is Messiah. But he would not accept their testimony, but it would only produce chaos. And these people were there, would be screening everybody else off. It would have turned into perhaps a riot, a stampede, who knows. Jesus will not accept it. But Jesus will cast out the unclean spirits, and he will do it today. So long.